Season 2, Episode 3 starts now. It's the Plot Hole Show. I am your host, Brandon Davis. Joined today, we have Jenna Anderson.
Hey, everybody. You kept joking before the show that I am the Jen Walters of today. I'm like, I should have worn like a sensible blazer or something and gone full lawyer mode for this. So, but yeah, happy to be here.
I don't know if you're lawyer Jen Walters or Professor Jen Walters today, or both, but I think it's going to be quite a show. We got Aaron Perrine. Oh, Aaron's muted.
Oh, no.
We have Aaron Perrine we could see, but not here. We'll get that figured out and come back in a second. And we got Charlie Ridgely.
I'm just here to get yelled at.
That's right.
So
that's right.
I'm happy
Always
to be here.
The victim, never the victimizer. Charlie Ridgely. All right, everybody. This is a show. This is the Plot Hole Show. So we are going to run through a bunch of various plot holes in the MCU, decide whether or not they are MCU plot holes. Impossible in our continuity, never. But so these are going to range from things that just don't make any sense in the grand scheme of the story to tiny little meaningless details that we just want to know more about. Like, if S.H.I.E.L.D. existed in the 90s in Captain Marvel, why was Phil Coulson still working on a name in Iron Man 2? So we're going to present the plot holes. Some of these we found on our own just from knowing the MCU. And then I found some of these like on CBR, Insider, Digital Spy, Screen Rant, just Comicbook.com. I just did a bunch of searches. We all kind of picked from a long list of plot holes. They didn't all make the cut. And then we're going to make our cases based on everything we found for each of these plot holes, whether or not we think it's an actual error, whether it's innocent or guilty, or there's a plot hole all along, or whether or not the story has gone on to pave over that plot hole and make it a nice, smooth continuity highway. So I'm going to go first because the topic that inspired this is my first topic. I had a Twitter conversation with my friend, It's Poloni, and I said that the events of Loki's finale did not impact the events of Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. At first I said no, but I think I was wrong. So let's just start there. I'm going to open up the comment section so I can see what people are saying as we go as well. We are. The comment section, I imagine, is going to be having fun with this one. Okay, so Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of, not in the Multiverse of Madness, the Loki finale, where Jonathan Majors made the MCU debut as a version of Kang the Conqueror, saw Kang as like the founder of the TVA, the keeper of the sacred timeline, making sure there were no other timelines. And then he died. Sylvie killed him. By the way, there are spoilers for everything in the MCU so far in this show. So Kang, this version of Kang known as He Who Remains, basically Nathaniel Richards, dies. And seemingly the multiverse is unleashed. That allows all these timelines to exist. And you thought this was going to be the reason why all these villains were coming into Spider-Man No Way Home. But no, it was Doctor Strange's spell that was supposed to make people forget who Peter Parker was. I don't know who Peter Parker is. Anybody ever heard of that kid? I don't know who that is.
Ouch.
The spell was supposed to make everybody forget who Peter Parker was, but it accidentally went wrong because Peter Parker can't shut up. And all of a sudden, all these characters from other universes started coming in and chasing Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and for some reason that included Electro and Eddie Brock. We'll get to that later. It seemed to not directly connect. Like Loki was on Disney Plus earlier in 2021, and then this happened, and it was like, well, what? Why didn't one impact the other? Why didn't we see how or did it? Or did it, as Twitter told me when I said I thought this was an oversight where Marvel Studios had too much to plan. I have a couple quotes I want to read first. This is from Spider-Man No Way Home writer Chris McKenna to The Wrap. When we started breaking the story and even started writing the script, we followed Doctor Strange 2 in the timeline. So then during pre-production, things got pushed and changed. We were supposed to start shooting in July of 2020, and it became November of 2020. Our release date got pushed from July 2021 to December 2021. There were a lot of things flipping around, and that's basically all they said about whether or not they considered Loki. And then Kevin Feige told Collider, for people following along with the MCU, Loki in the final episode of Loki to that, in terms of how and why, sort of what you are about to see is possible and why it's happening. Okay, that's where my mind starts to change. Kang had been using Goliath to keep everything destroyed that needed to be destroyed. That would have been an alternate universe. And he was using the TVA to police the other timelines and Nexus events to prevent them from ever being created and existing. So when Kang got taken down, when Goliath got taken down, all these other universes were permitted to exist. So you got to think of it this way. The Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, some of which took place 20 years ago, for us, were just created in the multiverse now. They just started to exist. So in theory, all those timelines, maybe those can include Chris Evans as Human Torch. I don't know. They all just started to exist by comparison to the MCU. The timelines don't necessarily have to go in line with ours. So I think the Loki finale did, in fact, impact Spider-Man No Way Home in a classic Disney Plus series fashion, in a way that you could totally go watch it without watching the show on Disney Plus and still fully understand the story. Whew. I was wrong on Twitter. I don't think this was a plot hole. I think they do connect. I think they made sure Loki happened before Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And Doctor Strange's spell is simply what brought the other multiverse characters into the Spider-Man No Way Home story. Loki had to make them exist in the first place. Not a plot hole. That's my ruling. Charlie, you're on the top of the screen. Thoughts?
I agree. I don't think it's a plot hole. There are very few things, honestly, that I think are plot holes when you really dig into them and play around with it. I think that the way that you approach it, I think, is makes the most sense. And to kind of put it in a simpler fashion, it's essentially, because of Kang, the multiverse is able to be accessed. It was not able to be accessed before. And now that broke, Doctor Strange could do what he did. And because his spell messed up, the multiverse was able to be accessed. Had Kang not died, that spell could not have gone awry in the same way that it did. Is kind of my thought. The other way you could look at it is, if you want to take a different approach with Loki, there's time is so relative. That finale in Loki could have taken place at any point in the MCU timeline. So it could be 30 years from now, because the time isn't real for the TVA. And so there could be, in 7 years, a big movie where we see Loki, the whole timeline explode, all the multiverse comes in, Secret War, whatever. I think that's much less plausible, but it isn't also an explanation. What you said makes much more sense, and I do think that it is not a plot hole. It's not very well explained in either place, but it doesn't have to be. It is what it is. The multiverse can be accessed, and that's all that happened in Spider-Man No Way Home.
It's a deep cut connection for us nerds. Jenna, any thoughts?
No, I agree. I don't really regard this plot hole. I still think, given the COVID and the ever-changing release dates of everything we've gotten in Phase 4, the fact that they were able to kind of shuffle around whether Loki, Doctor Strange 2, and Spider-Man No Way Home, what order they would have gone in, the fact that they still kind of stuck the landing and it makes enough sense is still kind of a miraculous thing to me. I think by the time Multiverse of Madness comes out, we might have a more definitive answer on kind of some of the things that we're trying to explain here. But yeah, I don't regard it as a plot hole. The multiverse is something that in the comics can just be so nebulous and is really just used as the story needs it. And I feel like this is an example of two different ways that the multiverse was needed to tell these stories.
Was Multiverse of Madness supposed to have already come out by now?
Yes.
Originally.
Obviously, Loki hadn't happened yet, but originally we should have seen it already.
Well, originally I think Loki still would have been...
Right. Originally we should have had Spider-Man, Loki, Doctor Strange in that order.
No, Doctor Strange
it would have
originally
been
Spider-Man.
Doctor Strange would have been first.
Really?
Yes.
At Comic-Con in 2019.
Yes.
I'm gonna look it up right now, but
it's changed so many times that I've lost memory of what was supposed to happen and what wasn't supposed to happen.
I'm pretty sure it was Doctor Strange and then Loki and then Spider-Man. And even then, that might have been the time when Spider-Man would have still just been a Craven movie and wouldn't have had anything to do with
Spider-Man was supposed to be 2020.
Yeah.
I do think there was probably a more cohesive and obvious line between them, because the order of release was WandaVision, Doctor Strange, Loki, and then Spider-Man.
Okay, so WandaVision would have gone right into, him seeing Wanda saying, "I'm not here for what happened."
Yeah.
All of that into the multiverse.
So, but that doesn't mean this is a plot hole. I think this just...
Right. I was just curious by that idea.
Yeah. We're all living in this panoramic, and they're making it work. And they found a way, but this is definitely a big
it looks like
plans. And also, I do just want to say, I love Spider-Man No Way Home. The only thing I think could have made me like it more is if we got the original Spider-Man No Way Home with Mysterio returning as revealed in the concept art this week, and then got this movie later. I'm just saying. I'm glad we got this movie, but I think it would have been cool if we got the Craven movie. Anyway, Aaron, can we hear you?
I think so.
Yeah. Welcome to the
Aaron!
party. Aaron's here. All right. Well, Aaron missed a lot of that chat, so we took a long time. So we're just going to move on to our second plot hole of the day
Yes.
and keep moving.
So the second plot hole on this list is the Infinity Gauntlet that is in Odin's vault. It was originally teased kind of in the background of the first Thor movie, and then not really acknowledged since then. We had Thanos trying to form his own Infinity Gauntlet and all that sort of stuff. And then we had Hela in Thor Ragnarok eventually find the gauntlet and just say that it was a fake, knock it over. That was that. So people have still kind of been curious of like, can you have more than one Infinity Gauntlet out at the same time? What does this mean with regards to Thanos' Infinity Gauntlet? Basically, the consensus from the people involved with Marvel Studios is like, stuff changed between Thor 1 and where we're at now, so don't overthink it. Kevin Feige had a quote from Slash Film where he was like, going all the way back to phase 1, where Infinity War was just barely a glint in our eye, we were working on Avengers and trying just to put all of that together for the conclusion of phase 1. It's in one shot. It's in one shot in the background. And pretty quickly after that, within a couple of years, we were like, well, that's clearly not the gauntlet. The gauntlet can't be there. We had an internal Marvel theory that it was fake, that the Odin who you have seen in the other films, who I guess is a good father, he's kind of an okay father who kind of fosters the rivalry. He put a fake and then he was like, it's fine, kids, don't look at it. It's fine. It's in our vault. Don't worry about it. It's not until Hela goes down there. For people like yourself and all of us at Marvel Studios who were paying attention, that answers that question. For the people who have no idea that an out-of-focus Infinity Gauntlet appeared in the back of Thor 1, it just showcases her knowledge and her sort of disgust in the way that Odin has handled things on her way to the true power that is below the surface of Asgard. And then Marcus and McFeely, during our comic book quarantine watch party in 2020, did say, I believe that there's an existing myth of the gauntlet that can unify the stones. So Odin kind of made a fake one to kind of foster that myth. And then Thanos has his own gauntlets, and that is all how all of that works together. I kind of agree with that logic. I think that Odin clearly knew so much about the cosmic side of the MCU and about the myth of the Infinity Stones that he might have just made a gauntlet for himself just on the off chance he could use it, or just to pretend that he could have the capability to use it. And then that has nothing to do with Thanos' whole quest. So I don't necessarily think it's a plot hole. I think it's more of an interesting bit of world building that kind of retroactively worked out, but it's one of those things that I know people still debate about.
I think this was a mistake that they found a good way to smooth over. And I think we're going to see a few of those. Like, I think this is like, well, cool, we can have the Infinity Gauntlet in there because who knows? Like, they weren't thinking we're going to get that far when they made Thor.
Yeah.
So I think it was a cool Easter egg that never had all of that story attached to it. And it's cool to see them attach that story as a way to say, yeah, Odin, this is part of Odin's lore. We'll brush this over because the fans kept bringing it up. We'll brush it over in Ragnarok, and then we'll roll straight into Infinity War. Perfect timing. Yeah, I give it a pass. Not a plot hole.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that feels like the story of so many things in this. Is like we did a thing just to do a thing because it was fun and we didn't have a plan. And then we made a plan. Well, what about this little tiny thing that doesn't matter? People are going to whine about it forever. We have to address it. Or else we'll never stop getting asked about it. So we'll just address it and move on. You know.
Aaron, guilty or innocent?
I think it's fine. I mean, you're gonna see in a lot of my stuff, it's fine. Me and Jenna said this has the same vibes as the guy who's in the background, the Mandalorian with the pants. Has the same vibes as that. Where I would love if they just made an action figure out of it, lean into it, because we're all gonna eat it up when you explain it back to us anyway. Like I don't. When it happened, I was like, clearly, probably this is not, like Charlie said, there was not a plan. There was, we can do these things because we're here right now. And then when there became a plan, it's like, all right, well, how do we reverse engineer this so that it doesn't create, it doesn't all fold in on itself? And it's a pretty clever way to do it. I mean, Ragnarok's a pretty clever movie.
Right.
So it makes a lot of sense.
It kind of feels like, I mean, when you think back, this was what if you don't count Hulk, which was made, I mean, it was part of the MCU, but it was made, by Universal. Like Thor was like the third to fourth, depending on how you count Hulk, MCU movie. I have to imagine there was so much more freedom with every single little scene and every single little thing in the movie because they were building toward Avengers and that was it. So Kenneth Branagh and his production team and the production designers can be like,
Gilderoy Lockhart himself.
Let's put this in the background. It'll be great. And there wasn't like a whole team of people being like, well, actually, you can't for this, and this reason. They were just having fun, Like I'm sure if you dig enough into it, there's so many things from the first Iron Man that maybe aren't quite exactly how they're supposed to pan out. And I know we'll talk a lot today about things that were mentioned that then ended up not panning out.
Comic Book Nation host Kofi Outlaw in the chat pointing out, but the actual gauntlet was the same design as the fake because ... We're not going down that hole. You know what? I think we already gave this a pass. All right, Kofi, we get your point. But yeah, no, I don't know. It's just a myth. Maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe Odin and Thanos took it from the same blueprint. All right, moving on.
So I guess I have like Eagle's expansion from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It's kind of crazy that it would, cause all of this damage, not only on Earth, but in other places. Yes, BD has like a neighbor now on the right side. For those of you listening at home, it's weird. It is sort of interesting that this keeps happening in Marvel. I think that I'm just going to use these things as springboards to talk about larger Marvel things because I find that more interesting. And so there's a bunch of things that happen in the Marvel universe where there are huge world-ending / world-altering events. And then the first thing out of all of our mouths after the movies is, well, wouldn't someone wouldn't we still be hearing about the giant, weird, the blob goo monster that took up a bunch of like parts of America and people, I would assume, got absorbed into it or crushed by it? And it's going to be a throwaway joke in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Like, what are we doing? What are we really doing? James Gunn's going to have somebody mopping up the last remains of it in like the first 5 seconds of Volume 3, and we're all going to laugh.
And it's going to be Nathan Fillion.
Right, exactly.
Been washed up, and he's a
actor.
custodian at the theater where all his posters used to hang, and he is now mopping up the mess that used to be there.
I've got a 5 on him being a Dairy Queen employee in Guardians of the Galaxy. I got a 5 on that right
Nathan
now.
Fillion going full Paul Rudd.
Yep,
Dairy
exactly.
Queen never finds out.
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Dairy Queen never finds out.
They never finds out. They're just like, oh, what happened? There's just a guy holding a blizzard upside down for the last 4 years.
Guys.
Charlie, you're getting excited. It's making your mic cut out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry. I reached for coffee, and I think I hit the cord.
I don't think you need any more coffee, buddy.
It's my first cup of the day. It's my first cup of the day.
Wow, this is pre-coffee, Charlie.
Wow.
Wow. So I don't know what you guys think about it. Like, I don't know what you guys think about it. But it doesn't seem like it seems like it goes into a column I like to call to be determined. Because they reference it,
plot hole.
Like, it's a plot hole, really.
Plot hole.
You must hate the end of Eternals. You must hate the end of Eternals then.
I mean, the Earth should have exploded, but I'll give it a pass.
If aliens came out of this like of the Earth, why did no one in Hawkeye talk about it?
I'm just saying that this seems like a thing that would have been on pretty much everybody's radar in 2014 when Hydra was monitoring the valedictorian from that high school in New Mexico, and you had Nick Fury had the Avengers assembled recently.
You bring up an excellent point, Brandon.
It feels like this would have been referenced. It was a big event. That's all I'm saying. You bring up an excellent point, though, because I was going to get started talking about my next plot hole, which is exactly what you mentioned. I don't know if that was intentional or not. It probably was. You've been doing this a while. We're going to talk about Stephen Strange and the infamous Stephen Strange name drop in Captain America Winter Soldier, which came out and took place in 2014. Agent Sitwell, when he's being interrogated by Falcon and by Captain America and by Black Widow, like you see on the screen, he's listing people that are being watched by the algorithm, and he mentions Bruce Banner, Stephen Strange. He mentions valedictorian in Iowa. He mentions someone in Cambodia or something. He mentions a few like random or Cairo. He mentions some random people, but the only one he name drops that we didn't already know, like Bruce Banner, was Stephen Strange. And then obviously everyone freaked out because, oh man, Doctor Strange. I think Doctor Strange had been announced already at that time because it was coming out 2 years later. If not, it was about to be announced. It was kind of right in that time period. This came out, I think, in April of 2014. Doctor Strange was announced, I believe, in October of 2014.
Okay, so it hadn't come yet, but it was on the horizon. And so he named up Doctor Strange. The plot hole created there is that Doctor Strange does not become Doctor Strange until 2017. So they were just monitoring a neurosurgeon with no powers or anything. The kind of the plot hole is they mentioned watching this guy, but he was really no one of note for 3 more years. This was just a clever Easter egg, and they didn't think it through all the way. I think ultimately everything is a clever Easter egg they didn't think through all the way. But there is that quote from Sitwell actually goes a little bit farther and I think provides some grounds for why this still makes sense and why I don't think it's a plot hole. He's talking about Zola's algorithm, and he goes on to say, anyone who poses a threat to Hydra now or in the future. So you have, on one hand, you have this concept that the algorithm, Zola's algorithm, knows more than it lets on, which was kind of the whole purpose of Winter Soldier, is finding threats before they exist.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either take that as, here is this brilliant neuroscientist who is also kind of arrogant and impulsive and could be just dangerous in general because of how smart he is and how aggressive he can be. Or there's some kind of like, hey, there's a path this guy can go down where he can be incredibly powerful, like a Sorcerer Supreme. The whole point of that algorithm was to find people like that. And I think that one line, now we're in the future, really kind of, it's not a great explanation, but it covers all grounds, and it kind of keeps this from being a plot hole because they're working toward him being dangerous years down the road.
The Mark Zuckerberg algorithm over there.
Yeah.
That is
Zola. Meta by Zola.
So, Charlie, what do you think? Plot hole, not a plot hole?
Not a plot hole.
Ooh!
Not a plot. It's like everything else. It's an Easter egg that they had to explain later, but they kind of did it in this movie, which was nice. We didn't have to go digging further down the road. They put an exit line in this one.
I do think it's weird that an algorithm can predict a car crash, which leads to a trip to Nepal and to Kamartaj.
The Sorcerer Supreme, just he had the potential to become someone dangerous. That's what I'm saying. You know, I don't know if it's necessarily the sorcerer, but they had that ability. There are way harder things to jump on in the MCU.
Not a plot hole.
Okay, well, so first off, I didn't get to weigh in on Aaron's. I agree that it is in to be determined category. It does feel weird that nobody acknowledged the giant goo coming out across the planet. With the Stephen Strange thing, I don't see it as a plot hole. I don't necessarily believe the Zola algorithm is a precog that can magically tell that he was going to be a Sorcerer Supreme. I think it's the equivalent more of like if somebody were to name drop like Dr. Fauci or like some sort of like well-known scientist who just is someone that people are familiar with. I think it's just a thing you couldn't like for the sake of name dropping Stephen Strange within the movie and having Marvel fans recognize it, they had to say Stephen Strange, even though that's a name that Steve Rogers and Nat and Falcon do not know at that point. Like that, it's more for the fans than it is for the actual canon of the scene.
Right.
But I get why they would, at the time, long before he's going to become the Sorcerer Supreme, they would still think like, this guy's a high-profile surgeon. He could still be up to something. I think they just phrased it as Stephen Strange because they wanted the audience to recognize it.
And to piggyback, it could have been someone that if it was like a Fauci type or the most brilliant neurosurgeon in the world, like they could have heard about him. I'm sure Nat knew who he was. I'm sure he's been on magazines and stuff.
They were also just watching smart people. Bruce Banner's a scientist.
Exactly.
Stephen Strange is a doctor, a valedictorian, has good grades. So Aaron, giving you a chance real quick before we move on.
I think it is kind of funny because you could theoretically put an algorithm together that shows how many of these dudes end up being super smart and they end up being a problem in the future. So just monitor all the super smart people and boom, you've solved your problems in the future. But I do think it is kind of funny. It does feel like the Gauntlet where they did this and it was fun and that later on we're going to have to explain it back later. Also, if you really want to get really off the wall, like there's some weird Hydra person from Tobey Maguire's reality that told them that Stephen Strange was going to be a problem, and that's why he left. But yeah, that's about it.
That's true. They do that. There is a Doctor Strange in the Raimi-verse. All right, not a plot hole. Ego's expansion so far is the only one that might turn out to be a plot hole. All right, we got to keep moving. We're only on number 5, and we have 15 to run through, and we're already almost a half hour into the show. All right, number 5. This one is about the Mind Stone. Those of us who watched The Avengers, a small movie from 2012, will remember that the Mind Stone was blue. It can tap into people's heart and take control of their mind. Every time we see the scepter in the Avengers Age of Ultron, Avengers Endgame, the orb at the end of that scepter is glowing blue. When it is used on people like Clint Barton and Dr. Eric Selvig in Avengers 1, the effect running through their body and eyes is also blue. Blue is the color of the Space Stone, but the Space Stone is inside the Tesseract, which is also blue. Inside that scepter orb is the Mind Stone, which turns out to be yellow. James Gunn said a while back in an interview that the Power Stone is purple because the Aether was already red, and purple looked good for Guardians of the Galaxy, which makes me think they were just picking colors of things that looked good, which makes sense. Blue looked better with the gold and green and black Loki than a yellow would have. In 2014, Kevin Feige told Crave Online, I'm not even sure if we recognize Loki's scepter as an Infinity Stone, but that's a big hint as to what will be causing them trouble in the movie. That probably was him kind of teasing Age of Ultron and saying, like, it's coming. We don't as an audience recognize it. But if we take it out of context, we can manipulate Kevin Feige's words and say that he didn't know the scepter was an Infinity Stone. But actually, I'm not going to do that. But that aside, it seems that much like the Aether being like a red goo in Thor the Dark World, Marvel Studios didn't know from the jump that the scepter would be containing an Infinity Stone, as they probably weren't planning for movies 7 years ahead, and they were still developing their 5th movie at the time. So the blue color is almost certainly just a design choice for the look of the scepter and Loki, and the in-canon reason for it being blue is that the orb cases it that way, and you could say Thanos made it so that Loki wouldn't know there was Infinity Stone inside of it, but when it breaks free in Age of Ultron or WandaVision, it turns yellow, and we see the yellow Mind Stone, the Infinity Stone. I think this is one of those, it is what it is. It certainly wasn't the intention to make the scepter the Mind Stone, but it was too good of a story fit to make it the Mind Stone, so they just had to change the color of it. So it's a plot hole cover-up, as said by F Society with a bunch of numbers in the comment section. FS0C131Y is the more appropriate way to say that name. But yeah, this is just this is paving over that plot hole and making it a nice, smooth continuity highway. Jenna, thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of colors. Like, I don't think it's anything more than that. Of like you said, they didn't intend to have Loki's scepter be an Infinity Stone. And when you have to take into account the existing Infinity Stones and what colors they were, it kind of had to happen. It doesn't bother me that much. It's one of those things of like, you look at all of the Green Lantern power rings and all of the schematics that go into what colors are what, and this feels like nothing by comparison. So it's like, I will let this slide.
There's a comment here that I agree with. Norin is rad. Sweet name, by the way. Looking forward to his debut. It's weird that the Mind Stone sparks Wanda's powers as opposed to the Reality Stone, which is what her power does. And it's also, her powers are kind of red. So I find that interesting. But yeah, whatever. It's just colors. Like Agatha Harkness had purple magic. I don't know. Everybody's got to die. Doctor Strange has orange
I feel
magic.
like it would have been an easier explanation to ultimately make the Space Stone yellow. Like the Tesseract is a box. If it's a blue box, if a yellow stone is glowing inside a blue box, it's still just going to glow blue.
If they made the Tesseract yellow, we'd be having this conversation about the Tesseract.
No, I'm saying I think I have less hoops to jump around that way. They were going to change one. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I'm just saying for me that would have been easier. But ultimately, it is like everything else we've talked about at this point, just a thing that they didn't think about because they weren't planning that far ahead, and then they had to adjust on the fly.
As Black Loki 3004 has pointed out, Aaron loves to rub his chin, and I think Aaron is indicating that there's a thought brewing.
It's just funny. We're all in the pocket of Big Crayola right now. Like, what is going on? What are we doing? It's true. I think it's one of those things, like you guys said, where it's like we can just kind of flatten this on out and we keep it moving. It's much easier to fix the stone coloring thing than some of the other stuff on this list. It's way easier to just be like, oh, well, it was in the box.
Why hasn't Crayola come out with color pencils that are like the Infinity Stones? Like the colors are the Infinity Stones, and they have Thanos in the box.
Business doesn't need to spend that money on the Marvel license. They're already thriving.
Oh,
they're getting name dropped on Space Zero without it. All right. I say plot hole. It was fixed, but it was a mistake. All right. All right, we're moving on.
All right.
Oh, this is a big one.
Yeah, I'm like, speaking of plot holes, this is the one where I am like, so the Eternals should have stopped Thanos, right? When you think about the specifics of it. Cersei initially says in the Eternal, like this long before this movie even came out, there was always the question of like, why didn't the Eternals stop Thanos? So where's the no sap apology from the Eternals about why they didn't stop Thanos? In the movie, Cersei initially says, I can't take credit for that joke. So many people made that joke when the trailer started coming out, and it made me so happy. Cersei initially says that they weren't allowed to interfere if deviants weren't involved with a conflict. The movie later reveals that the Eternals were more focused on the emergence anyway, and that Thanos' actions and the blip are ultimately what kind of start the emergence. It's like if Thanos hadn't done the snap, and then the Avengers did the snap to kind of have everyone come back, then the energy wouldn't have been harnessed as quickly for the emergence to happen. So I could make the argument either way. There is the argument to be made that Thanos is technically an Eternal, so you would think that if they're aware of Thanos in any capacity, they could have been able to be like, hey, stop that. We're going to kind of still try to stop you because this is within our own group and it isn't necessarily involving the deviants. But it might just be a thing where they didn't genuinely know who Thanos was until all of the snap stuff started happening. I'm just going to argue that Arishem wanted the kind of chaotic energy that resulted from the blip so that the emergence could start as soon as possible. So it wouldn't have made a difference either way if they had helped or not, because that was ultimately fulfilling their true mission. I think this is the most plot holy of like everything that I have on this list and probably everything that's on the list overall. It also just feels contrived in a way that like most superhero stuff of this kind of capacity doesn't have to go through this many narrative leaps to kind of make something like this make sense. I still don't think it 100% makes sense, but that's why I said this is the most plot holy of them to me, because it is just it's a weird thing to always have to deal with.
This one's an easy plot hole to me. I mean, especially if he is an Eternal, if he is the brother of Eros, who is an Eternal. We met Eros. They said he's the brother of Thanos. So unless Thanos is like Loki, the adopted villain brother, like he's part Eternal. He is at least part Eternal, and he's literally setting them back billions of years on their mission to have enough souls on Earth for the Celestial to get energy from.
Is he?
Go ahead, Charlie.
Eternal, though?
I mean, if he's the brother of Eros and
but
not
can't
adopted,
Eros be the adopted one? Like he's a Titan from Titan, and we established that in the MCU.
I don't see
that's been established, like where he comes from. Eternals were built and created. We know that. So why can't Eros be the one that was adopted into Thanos' family as an Eternal?
They just adopted an Eternal kid.
I mean, it makes as much sense as Thanos being an Eternal. But it's all weird.
But Eros would be like thousands of years older than Thanos, right? If he was,
they can be made whenever, can't they?
Well, they were made 7,000 years ago.
I mean, some of them were, but then they make more. Like they can just make more whenever they want to.
I do have to say, we would be having this conversation completely differently if they had put Harry Styles in like the opening scene of the movie, like we know they were supposed to, because then that would make this all so much weirder. Of like, oh, he was on Earth with the rest of this group and then went off and became Thanos' brother and stuff. So yeah, I don't know at this point. It is just
the other thing too is that the people in charge of the Eternals on Earth were the ones keeping them from being involved with stuff. So,
but even if that, like, I also see the argument that Thanos is a deviant, which is even more reason to stop him. But it's the fact that they do interfere often, and that Thanos was setting them back billions of years.
But not really.
No, literally, yes. In every single, he erased that.
I kind of see.
No, they wanted the emergence, like the people, not all the Eternals, but Icarus, like the ones that were in charge. Their goal was to get to the emergence. Thanos brought out the emergence. Why would they stop him?
How did they know Thanos was bringing out the emergence when Thanos snapped literally half of the life away, and they needed as much life as possible?
They said in the movie that the energy of the snap brought about
the energy of like the Avengers snap to bring everything back. So unless like the way that I try to reconcile with it is that Arishem somehow knew that the Avengers were going to do that snap, and then that was going to create the energy that would kick off the emergence. But so that might be why he didn't let the Eternals interfere at all, because it's like in 5 years this will eventually pan out in a way that will help us. It's just not going to look like it right now.
I mean, if Doctor Strange knew, Arishem probably knew.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You know?
this is like the central tension of the MCU now, because no one knows who's the chicken and who's the egg. Because like I think Arishem in this is our proverbial chicken, and since he is the chicken, everything else falls after him. So he's more powerful than Kang. He's more powerful than he knows more than So if he did the calculus on if we have him snap and take everybody away, but the humans bring everybody back, whatever, 5 years, was it 5 years later? Like, then we get the net gains with no one dying, which is some real degenerate gambler stuff. But
but that also not only sets it back on Earth, like Thanos erased all of the life, half the life in all of the universe. Like every planet that is a celestial womb now has law. And also, by the way, this is a different thing, I guess, for a different podcast. But does this mean like at random points throughout the MCU, other planets can just explode?
Yes,
like,
that's exactly what that means.
Absolutely.
They have now built in the ability to bring in a new celestial whenever they want to, because the Avengers didn't exist on other planets to stop and to bring Thanos back, or to stop Thanos or whatever.
Okay, so we will spend all day arguing about this one.
I know.
And our number 15 needs at least 3 hours to debate. So we got to keep moving. I rule plot hole, Charlie.
I think it could go either way depending on the future.
You got to go one way. You got to go one way.
For now, I think plot hole, yeah.
Okay, Jenna?
Plot hole. This is the most plot holey of everything that is on here. There's a better way they could have explained this, and they did not. So we'll just have to wait and see.
I'm with you. Aaron?
I think it is, but I now expect that the third act of Captain Marvel is them fighting against the celestial bursting out of whatever planet they're on. Yeah.
All right, we are on.
We are
taking so long today. We gotta move.
When I saw you had 15 on this list, I was like, oh god, this is so many to go through.
I saw you pick 4, so I couldn't pick less. And then we all just started. Jenna set the tone here, everybody. All right, we're moving.
Okay, all right. So I've got Thor's first time on Earth, of course, is in 2011's Thor, but Earth somehow has his legends. So this seems a little strange, but it has been further complicated by later entries, because freaking Loki is DB Cooper. That's before 2011. And I refuse to believe that Thor wouldn't go down there and spy on him and laugh at him doing all of this stuff on the dare. Also of note is him being with Gilgamesh at some point as a small child, which who knows would that happen. So it does kind of complicate itself. But at the moment in time, it's like, wait, what? How? Other than, maybe they just have a really good propaganda department over there in Asgard. Maybe Odin put people down there, like, talk about how awesome I am. Which, I mean, rich people do all the time. And rulers do all the time. So I don't know. But it seems a little bit weird, and is complicated by later entries in the franchise in ways that I was like, oh, this is super strange now. And we're probably not going to get any direct things. Maybe they just had Matt Damon acting out that play on Earth back in the 30s or the 40s or something.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Kingo also said he was friends with Thor.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know where that was. I say not a plot hole.
Yeah, I'm in not a plot hole camp. I think that, Thor was the rule follower in the original Thor movies. He was this kind of righteous rule following type. I can imagine Loki being on Earth and not Thor. And I also, legends are legends. They can be made up and not. And I don't think it really affects the plot. It might be a thing that doesn't make a lot of sense when you talk about it, but it has nothing to do with the plot of the movies. So not a plot hole for me.
Yeah, I feel like this had the potential to be a plot hole. I think it is one of those things, like we said earlier, where establishing one thing in a phase 1 movie then kind of comes around and bites you in the butt in a phase 3 movie. I think it is this thing where the legend of Thor and the legend of Odin probably was passed on through so many different degrees of storytelling. Like, even if Thor wasn't physically on Earth, there might have been other Asgardians who did come to Earth and did explain who Thor was, and that kind of perpetuated the legend. It is kind of weird to believe in hindsight that Thor didn't come to Earth until 2011, but it is one of those things of this is what was established in phase 1. So we just kind of have to reconcile it and move on, I guess.
He was there earlier, and then to cover up his tracks, he created the MIB with Tess Thompson. And deleted everybody's memories, and there you go. There we are.
Just look right here for me.
Yep.
Nope.
So Thor is a great place to be right now. All of the rest of my plot holes have to do with Thor and Loki. because Thor, and I'll dig into this more in the one after this, no one has changed so much, and no one's story has been so drastically altered like Thor's has. They completely pivoted the entire tone of that character and story in Ragnarok from what it was in the first two movies and the first two Avengers movies. They kind of put on a 180 because it wasn't working, and then Taika Waititi happened. So a lot of the Thor stuff kind of alters as you go through the MCU because of that shift. But one of the plot holes people talk about with Thor is the Bifrost. And this is the one of the ones I had that I think is the closest to being an actual plot hole. They do kind of explain it. But in the very first movie, the very first Thor movie, the biggest tension at the end was that if he destroyed the Bifrost, he could not get to Earth. And he chose to save the Frost Giants and save Jotunheim over being able to ever be with Jane again. And that was like this giant moment because he was choosing like what was right over the love of his life. And that didn't matter at all after that first movie because he goes to Earth all the time. They explained in the first movie that, hey, the Bifrost is the Rainbow Bridge is the only way to get to the Bifrost. And that's the only way to get to Earth, which that's a whole other thing too about where Asgard is and what's a realm and what's a planet and all that. But they can't get back to Earth. Then all of a sudden in Avengers, he shows up and there's one sentence about dark magic. Odin used dark magic to send him to Earth. And that's all they say is dark magic. There's no explanation. There's no anything other than dark magic. It's the same dark magic that's referenced in Infinity War when Heimdall sends Hulk back to Earth. He says something about give me that dark magic, manifest that dark magic one more time. Help me send him back to Earth. It is not explained well. I don't know if it's a plot hole, but it is not explained well because the more you think about it, the more you go into it. There's the whole it's a different realm. You can only access it through magic. But then at the end of Ragnarok, the planet explodes. They just go into space, and that's the same space that the Guardians occupy. So they didn't need magic to travel to where it would have been. It was all right there. And, according to the legend, it's in the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So you can access it with a ship. I think the idea of the Bifrost being the only way to get from one place to another was just kind of bad to begin with, because then you had the Space Stone, then you had Stormbreaker. Stormbreaker can go from one place to another. It was just a convoluted mess, more so than an actual plot hole. It just kind of narratively sucks.
Bro, what you just said is the definition of a plot hole. It's a convoluted mess and it narratively sucks. But it's not a plot. It's a plot hole.
Because a plot hole means it can't work. They made it work. It just sucks how they did it. If you make
something up and change the rules, then
I'm saying, I'm not defending it. I'm saying it's a bad story point. But I think the definition of a plot hole means that this can't work because of this thing. This thing is in the way of something working.
Well, but that was the rule. That's what they said. They said the only way to travel is the Bifrost, and then they had.
And then they wrote a bad explanation for why you can still do it.
Well, yeah, that's a plot. That's kind of what a plot hole is.
I think they worked around it, but I think it still sucks. My point.
I'm on team plot hole for this one.
I think we're arguing about the definition of a plot hole more than anything at this point.
I'm on team plot hole for this one. I remember watching the Avengers for the first time and being like, "Yo, how did my guy make it to Earth here? Last time I saw him, Bifrost was destroyed." And I think the dark. How much energy did Father conjure? That's not enough of a.
And they rebuilt it like 2 years later.
And there's also
like
no
this legendary thing that you can't do, and then all of a sudden 2 years later, like, oh yeah, no, like we rebuilt this faster than the Avengers Tower.
And there's no consequences for using dark energy, seemingly. So I say plot hole.
By your definition, it's a plot hole, 100%.
I
will agree with
plot hole. Absolutely. I also got distracted in the chat because Jim was talking about the biggest plot hole of whether or not Hemsworth and Thor still tie their eyebrows because, given his eyebrow color in the first movie, the entire chat was just wild for that.
There was a lot of F's in the chat for
Absolutely.
Thor's blonde eyebrows. I miss Shakespearean Thor every day of my life. I wake up and wish
you are the only one.
I am not. Guarantee you I'm not. Shakespearean Thor was fantastic. Aaron?
I think it is, but also I'm just realizing how far my suspension of disbelief goes, because I was like, oh yeah, they did destroy the Bifrost. I haven't thought a second about it since it happened.
Same here.
Ain't not a second. I mean, they rebuilt it. Stormbreaker can summon it. Like they've completely
That's
papered
the
over.
point. It doesn't
any of
matter in the larger story. Like they whatever they did it. It's fine. It doesn't keep anything from happening.
Yeah.
First of all, bridges are last year anyway. We on portals now. There's 8 million different portals in the MCU now. Forget that.
All right. So we all are. I like how we can all argue with each other and then be like, "Yeah, but we're on the same team here." All right.
I want to point out, Jim just said in the chat that Thor 1 is a top 5 MCU movie, and that is a
How is Jim twitching from jail? Cut off the Wi-Fi in that prison where Jim's at. But Thor 1 is a great film, and I would argue it's close in quality to Ragnarok. At least it feels like there's stakes. All right.
Okay.
In Spider-Man Homecoming, this. You want to talk about the most definitive plot hole of all the plot holes on our list today? I'm just going to spoil it for you. Plot hole in Spider-Man Homecoming. It starts with Michael Keaton in the wake of the Battle of New York from the Avengers in 2012. Very well known 2012 event. It is said many times the Battle of New York was in 2012.
They just in Hawkeye specifically mentioned that it was in 2012.
Yeah, and in Avengers Endgame, they traveled to 2012 because that's where it was set. And then 8 years later, right? We're 8 years after that. That puts us in 2012 plus 8 is 2017. Apparently, that would put us in 2020. This is a plot hole. Kevin Feige to Cinema Blend in 2017. All that debate has made us go, okay, at some point, I'm not sure exactly when we're going to publish a timeline and see when it all is. It wasn't meant to flummox anybody exactly, and I'm not sure I'd do it again the same way, but it does all connect to where we placed it, other than very particular instances where there's a newspaper or verbal reference to years. We never date the films, and I think there's a presumption, well, if a movie came out in November 2017, it must take place in November 2017, which is not the case. That's not true. We don't think that. Joe Russo, more candidly, in an interview with Ashish Chanklani, said he was asked how many years between Homecoming and Civil War or something like that, and he said it was 8 years, I believe. It was a very incorrect 8 years. And then sitting beside him was executive production and development at Marvel Studios, Trin Tran, who also said incorrect. So they just admitted it themselves. This is a mistake. Spider-Man Homecoming is not set in 2020. That 8 years later is stupid. I think it was a bad
There
play.
was no Spider-Man on the whole planet.
There was exactly. But if you think about it really carefully, 2012 plus 8 puts you in 2017. Peter's suit tells us that a criminal born in 1984 in Homecoming, the suit says this, is currently 33 years old. So that puts us like 2016, 2017 timeline. So the bottom line, mistake. But Kevin Feige has also said that he thinks of like the MCU timeline as pre-I Am Iron Man and post-I Am Iron Man. So if you say 8 years later after post-I Am Iron Man, that's about when Homecoming is set. Yeah, this is just I'm just trying to give somebody an argument here. I'm trying to give you guys a layup to try to defend this. This is case closed, team plot hole. Boom. Anybody else?
It's a plot hole, but I think it's maybe one of the most egregious ones because with the exception of Eternals, almost everything else we talked about was like they did this when they didn't have a plan and then they had to figure it out later.
You can't
like
fix
they
this.
knew what was happening. Right now. They knew about Infinity War. They had already planned the snap when they made that title card and said 8 years later. This is the hardest one to excuse in my mind.
Agree.
Yeah, I am definitely in team plot hole. It's one of those things of like, you didn't need that title card to begin with. You could have found another way to show that time had passed without definitively having to say 8 years later and then confuse everybody. So if it was a thing where it was like a newspaper that someone is physically holding doesn't have the correct year or some sort of thing in the canon of the movie, then that would be one thing. But just having a title card, it's unnecessary.
And they had it built in because the next thing you see is him making his little home movie. You put a little 16 like date up in the top of the camcorder or whatever, like you're done. You don't need anything.
Yeah. So it's a mistake.
Yeah, even before seeing Infinity War, watching this movie and seeing the 8 years later thing, I was sitting between my mom and Sean O'Connell from Cinema. I like looked at, but I don't know. I looked both. My eyes went like that, and I was like, "What?" Yeah, but anyway, and then I found out like later, definitely plot hole. Aaron,
considering this thing garnered its own like mini like section of that History of Marvel Studios book, which was amazing. Like I was very good. Can't recommend it enough. I was so like sometimes, at least I worked in social media, so you put out posts sometimes and you don't read things sometimes. You like glaze over them. But that's like small posts. Some posts you really need to read what is going out before you go ahead and you sign off on it, because I'm sure someone was like, yeah, that sounds about right, and no one thought about it any further. And that's where that's why it's such an egregious thing and why everybody's so hung up on it, because it's like you could have just not, like, if one person had thought about it for just a second, they would have been like, oh, that's wrong, we have to change it or whatever. One call to Kev and it would have been
chat
fine.
is just
and everyone in
blaming
chat
the Sony
blaming
editors.
Sony, but like, I mean, Marvel was a part of
Marvel
making this
signed
too.
off on
Like
it
Marvel
too,
signed
yeah.
off on the final thing before it went out, so we can't just blame Sony for it. It was just a mistake.
Yeah. The Punisher Feige went and took care of that editor's family.
Jesus Christ.
Yikes. So on the topic of Spider-Man and potential plot holes in Spider-Man, we're going to jump way forward to Spider-Man No Way Home. The question that is still on fans' minds is, how does Eddie Brock and Venom and Electro come to the MCU as a result of Doctor Strange's spell that says anyone who knows that Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is going to come to this universe? How do they come over to this universe when they supposedly don't know who Peter Parker is? This has been a thing that has been debated ad nauseum, and there honestly is a very simple explanation. If you pay attention to the post-credit scene of Venom, Let There Be Carnage, the movie I still get flack for liking.
Unofficial MCU movie.
It's MCU adjacent. It's close enough. The symbiote hive mind knows who Peter Parker is. That could necessarily mean that, like, Topher Grace's Venom technically knows who Peter Parker is, and that information is being given to Tom Hardy's Venom, or it could just be like any of the other symbiotes in the universe. We know there are so many. We know that Null is a thing that exists in the comics. Like, the symbiote mythos is its own weird can of worms. There is a way for one of them to know who Peter Parker is across the multiverse. That information is absorbed by the Venom that we are seeing here, and so that is why he is accidentally, not even really to his knowledge, thrown into the MCU for the weird little vacation that he and Eddie go on for exactly 2 scenes. That one I'm totally fine with. The Electro of it all, I get why people kind of don't understand it, because given the plot of Amazing Spider-Man 2, it might seem as if he didn't necessarily know. The way that I kind of look at it, in No Way Home, he mentions that he was on a power grid absorbing data right before he was thrown into the MCU. And based on his scene with Andrew, he knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. He probably just didn't know what Peter Parker looked like. That's why he kind of makes the joke of like, I knew all this stuff about you, but I thought you would be black. It has the energy to me of the one episode of the Justice League cartoon where Lex Luthor swaps brains with the Flash, and then he's like, cool, I can finally unmask the Flash. I finally will get to know who this man is. And he takes off the mask and he looks in the mirror and he's like, I have no idea who this person is. Like, it has that same sort of energy to me, where Electro knew the information Peter Parker is Spider-Man. He just wouldn't have been able to recognize that person on the street until he started meeting them over the course of the movie. So I don't necessarily see this as a plot hole. There is so much extra explanation that has to go into that information, but it's all laid out there if you want to actually pay attention to it. So, Charlie?
I think you're 100% correct in everything you said. But I think that that information, which is right, creates a plot hole at the end of that post-credit scene in No Way Home. Because the symbiote knew who Spider-Man was, and that's why he and Eddie were transferred to the MCU. They knew, because of the hive mind, he opened Eddie to it, because Eddie still had to be explained by Christopher Fernandez, the bartender, had to be explained who Peter was, what Spider-Man is, all this stuff. The symbiote knew. So then when everything got reverted back, why did part of the symbiote stay? To me, that's the plot hole. Because how do you justify the symbiote staying when the symbiote knows? That's where my plot hole lies. I don't know if there's a better explanation for that. I think you're right in the first thing not being a plot hole, but I think it creates one depending on what they do next.
I think that question will eventually be answered. It's just they wanted the tease of like the symbiote exists in the MCU now. So I'm willing to kind of make that sacrifice if we now have that plot.
I personally think Sony just really wanted the symbiote in the MCU.
Yeah.
So they made it happen no matter how they were going to do it. I really like everything Jenna said, but without it all being laid out for me,
Mhm.
Electro specifically, I say plot hole. Doesn't really. I don't know that he could have. I don't know. I think I'm too stubborn to be convinced
fair.
on this one. I didn't
Mhm.
think of it your way until now, and it is kind of. I'm going on the other team just to go on the other team. But Venom, the hive mind stuff, that all checks out. But also just not presented though. So in terms
Yeah.
of MCU canon, well, we gotta get there, and it'll be one of those things like we've talked about earlier, where they make it make sense later. And Aaron,
If you consider
Aaron's-
Let There Be Carnage canon, then it's all explained.
I like to consider Let There Be Carnage non-existent.
I know you do,
Aaron,
but you know
what do
we
you
all
think?
like to be wrong sometimes.
I think that Johnny Cates stuck onto the set and cut a little bit of the symbiote off so he can have his stuff be in the MCU, because it seems
Uh-huh.
like we're headed for, at some point, like
Yep.
between Kit Harington's shiny sword, I'm like, there's not this much goop monster rolling around not null. Like, as someone who read all of Absolute Carnage for the site, I was like, my goodness.
Well, see,
this-
I think they're going
Mhm.
null for the solo Venom stuff.
Charlie,
use the
you
regular
move
Venom.
around and your mic creates the craziest
I'm-
sound.
Yeah.
Having a hard time today. I'm going to stay in one place. I'm not going to move from this spot because it's working right now.
It's perfect. There it is.
Electro knows who Spider-Man is because he's actually Charlie, and that's why the microphone's cutting out.
Electro is
There you go.
overcharging Charlie's headset.
There we
That's
go.
right.
Exactly what it
Jamie
is.
Foxx
Exactly what it
saying
is.
Too much.
All right. Well,
but
so
yeah.
I'm team plot hole. Let's go down the line here. Charlie,
Nah.
nah. Jenna,
Not a plot hole.
Aaron,
I think Electro could basically be, but I thought of the hive mind theory immediately. I was like, oh yeah, he remembers. Like Topher Grace remembers.
all right. I'm on an island here.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
All right, moving along.
Oh, it's me. Okay, so to piggyback on my last one about how Thor, everything with Thor changes. This is the most important one about Thor changing completely from movie to movie. In Ultron, this is a little. I love this because I don't want to dig too deeply into Joss Whedon and talk a lot about Joss Whedon, because I think that we would all agree he's just not a great dude. And I love that this is the thing that got him to rage quit the MCU. And then as soon as he was gone, they were like, it doesn't really matter. And they completely ignored it. And so he quit for no reason. And I think that's very amusing to me. They made him, that was the whole big sticking point. One of the big sticking points in Ultron is that he had to include this scene in which Thor has a vision about the Infinity Stones. It's one of two visions he has. The other one's the hallucination about Ragnarok. He is told in this vision by a white-eyed Heimdall that I'm dead, we're all dead, this is the end of things. And at the end of the movie, Thor after he has his vision, after they fight Ultron, all this stuff, he tells Steve and Tony he's leaving to find the other two Infinity Stones because 4 are in existence that we know of. You know, now they didn't know about the Power Stone, but he did that vision. And I have to go find the other ones. And then when we see him in Ragnarok, he has just not done that at all. He has accomplished nothing. And he's in prison, in a cage in almost hell, just hanging out. No, and then the rest of the movie does not mention the Infinity Stones whatsoever. They deal with the end of times in Asgard. And obviously, the biggest explanation for all of that is the tonal shift from what they were doing, the Shakespearean Thor, as Brandon likes to refer to it, into the Waititi Thor era. They found a more interesting angle for Thor, and they went with it. That's the behind-the-scenes explanation for a lot of this. What I struggle to understand with them is what they obviously wanted Thor to be closely involved with the Infinity Stones, and now we've seen it all play out. What was the original plan for Thor and the Infinity Stones? Because it seemed like it was a really important thing for Marvel, to the point where they were at odds with their biggest director at the time about involving Thor directly with the Infinity Stones. On screen, it's explained in the let me read the quote from the very beginning of Thor Ragnarok, when he's in the cage with a skeleton. And he says, then I went searching through the cosmos for some magic, colorful Infinity Stone things. Didn't find any. That's when I came across the path of death and destruction, which led me all the way here into this cage where I met you. Ragnarok's storyline has so much to do with Thor feeling like he's a failure and Thor coming to grips with his own shortcomings. And I think that the Infinity Stone thing kind of in a sense, kicks that story off and makes a lot of sense that he had this grand plan for what he had to do to save the universe, and he just couldn't accomplish it. I mean, he was never going to find the Soul Stone. No matter what he did, he wasn't going to find the Soul Stone. We know how the Soul Stone came about. He wasn't going to find the Soul Stone. And he left Earth to find the Time Stone when the Time Stone was on Earth. So I think he was kind of chasing red herrings throughout his whole journey over the 3 years between Ultron and Ragnarok. And he came across nothing. And in that process, however, because you think about the vision that he had with Heimdall, that vision was explaining Ragnarok, but it had to do with the Infinity Stones. I think he then discovered what was going on with the idea of Ragnarok and latched onto that instead of the Infinity Stones. And that's where we went. I don't think it's necessarily a plot hole, because he went on a journey, he changed his mind, found a different journey. It is strange, though, the emphasis that was put on it and how that emphasis was completely dropped and never brought up again. That doesn't make it a plot hole, but their ideas changed.
This is one of those things I think that the creative committee that I don't think exists anymore pushed for. And they clearly had their ideas of where this was going, and then it changed course. I say not a plot hole because it was already smoothed over, and I just appreciated the Infinity Stone references in Age of Ultron. They were like part of my favorite part of the film. I really was so excited about Thanos and everything. I do get kind of annoyed when stories shift this much. I do love Ragnarok, but I do love where Thor seemed to be going. I think I would have been happy with either version of the story. But not a plot hole for me.
Yeah, I agree that this isn't really a plot hole. It is a thing where I remember the shift from when Ragnarok was first announced in the first title treatment to like the Masters of the Universe very 80s title treatment and being like, oh, we are going on a completely different trajectory from what was in this scene. If anything, this scene still succeeds in the sense of if you are a general audience member who isn't necessarily aware of all of the Infinity Stones, this is your first exposure to the idea of them, which then makes Thanos showing up in the mid-credit scene with the gauntlet, like that actually has some sort of impact to it. So the scene still works and justifies its existence, but it is one of those weird things where this was still so early in the MCU in the grand scheme of things that I can see where they thought they were going in one direction and then they went somewhere completely different. But I don't see it as a plot hole.
It's interesting in that I'm sure, like Brandon really does point out, maybe they'll do this in Disney Plus. There is an alternate MCU that unfolds wildly different than what we actually have now.
Yeah.
And that journey would have been so much more different. But you're right. The funny thing is, I think for most general audiences, this is the first time that they ever heard about the Infinity Stones, is that freaking vision.
It would have been the second, right? Because they explain the Infinity Stones in Guardians of the Galaxy.
That was after this.
No,
it was before.
Guardians was
2014.
Oh, that's right.
Guardians 2014. Age of Ultron was 2015.
Okay, then, yeah.
This was the first time the Avengers had heard,
had
become aware of the Infinity Stones.
This was the grander, like they're on Earth. This is a thing, and the Avengers are involved. This was putting it into the grander picture, as opposed to this was a Guardians issue in one movie. Now it's an everyone issue.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this was the first time I think that they really addressed where the other ones were. Like you kind of see the ether turn into the red. You see things happen.
Yeah.
From stone to stone.
All right.
Yeah.
Not a plot hole. We're all in agreement, and the comment section is also mostly in agreement. Not a plot hole, just a cool scene that meant nothing. All right, Iron Man 2 and the arc reactors. In Iron Man 2, a huge point of the film is that the arc reactor in Tony's chest is slowly poisoning and killing him. If he takes it out, he'll die, and he can't power his suits anymore. He intentionally made it so the arc reactor in his chest is what powers the suits, so that his tech could not be stolen and used by anyone but him. A lesson learned in Iron Man 1 because Obadiah Stane wanted to steal the arc reactor to steal the suits, and he made his own Ironmonger suit with Tony's arc reactor. So in this same Iron Man 2 movie, we see suits like the Mark II from Iron Man 1, and it's just hopped into by his buddy James Rhodes and used during a fight at Tony's Malibu mansion and at the end of the film. So which one is it? Can the suits be powered without an arc reactor from Tony's chest or not? Well, I'm just going to probably debunk this one right away. This was one that I saw on all of the major plot hole searches I did. But Tony intentionally made suits that have like voice recognition for Rhodes, and they were in a location that requires security clearance. Presumably his best friend had security clearance. So he built the arc reactors into a few suits that can only be accessed and used by people with proper clearance. As Happy Hogan would say, security badge. The arc reactor situation is its own thing entirely, because if we skip ahead to Iron Man 3, I just remember sitting there and wondering how all of a sudden Tony can get the arc reactor and shrapnel near his heart removed and couldn't do that before. I don't remember that being addressed. It was just like a thing at the end of the movie, and I was like, wait, what? What's going on? And then I like Iron Man 3, but it does just kind of have its own ending that gets rendered meaningless by the next time we see Tony, because now he's just got an arc reactor he attaches to his chest anyway, and a whole bunch of suits. So whatever. But yeah, that was a plot hole I saw often, and
the suits start hiding inside the arc reactor when we get to Infinity War.
It's true.
Press the
When
button.
he handed Cap the arc reactor in that first scene where he's all skinny on Earth, I thought for sure we were going to see an Iron Captain America in that movie.
Ooh.
I thought for sure Cap was going to throw that on his chest for a fight and get a suit. But
He could have had the suit and the shield and Mjolnir
Yeah,
all at the same time.
That would have been that's a plot hole. Why didn't we get that?
BD, you're just imagining the Hot Toys figure that would come out of that.
I would buy it. That would be like $450 and
so much money.
Oh my god!
I would like to point out that this isn't even the only time he does the whole suit clearance for my, my like supporting casting, because that's how Peter's suits work.
Yeah.
He does the whole clearance, and with the glasses with Edith, he does the same thing where it's like, you wouldn't want this, and he's like, no, let's give it to the kid. He'll be fine.
Tony Stark, worst decisions, best character.
And even then, it's like in Armor Wars, we're going to see the consequences of how all of that can only go so far. It's like you can put in security, you can build it all in. It's still going to get in the wrong hands and cause chaos.
Someone just has a voice changer, and boom, I got all of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sharon Carter. All right, I say not a plot hole.
Yeah, no, not a plot hole.
Not a plot hole.
Not for me either.
All right, that was a good one. We're moving quickly. All right, that was my last plot hole.
Yeah, so my last one I'm going to also be quick with, because I also think the answer is relatively simple when you break it down. The Nova Corps say that Gamora is the last of her species when she first is captured in Guardians of the Galaxy 1. But as we learn in Infinity War, she isn't. Thanos says that half of her people, because as we see in the flashback sequence, we go to Gamora's planet, half of the people are killed, half of them survive, and Thanos tells Gamora that they are living happily in the present day. So the best way that I can think of to really boil this down, I don't necessarily see this as a plot hole. I see it as one of those things of different people in different corners of the universe have different information. I think it's the same argument of why Peacemaker is making people mad of like, oh, well, Batman kills or doesn't kill. It's like, well, these people in this little universe in another town don't necessarily know what Batman is doing at every second of every day. The Russo brothers said in a fan screening of Infinity War, who do you believe? Do you believe Thanos or do you believe Gamora? So I think it is ultimately this thing of furthering the proof that Thanos kind of gaslights Gamora. He kind of is emotionally manipulating her and is still she still feels like she is the last of her people, even if she isn't necessarily, because of the path that Thanos has put her on. So I feel like it has a potential to possibly be a plot hole, but I also think it's a thing of just Thanos is kind of lying.
I say plot hole because Thanos himself has admitted he's not a good liar. He said he said Gamora can't lie because he taught her a lot of things. That's not one of them because he can't even do it. No, I think this is just one of those things where they didn't think it would ever pan out, and then the Russo brothers and Marcus and McFeely come in for Infinity War and Endgame, and they have to show that, and they have to really define Thanos and his intentions, and that calls for half of Gamora's people being alive, which James Gunn's movie didn't.
I also think it's a thing of like those screens of information in the first Guardians movie, based off of comments that James Gunn has made. Another thing in one of the other people's little bits of information is probably going to not be made canon in Volume 3, like based off of a certain character that Rocket may or may not know. So it's this thing of like we've said it with a bunch of these other ones. You establish something in one movie, you eventually have to kind of retcon it and counteract it, and you just kind of have to make peace with that.
There's a lot of Thanos slander calling him a liar in the chat. Thanos was a good, honest person whose intentions were clear and pure.
If you tell yourself a lie long enough, you believe it to be true. You know,
if
Thanos
you read urinals in a bathroom in New York City,
gaslighting and lying to Gamora her whole life. So.
I say plot hole, but it doesn't really matter. Charlie?
Yeah.
No, I don't. It's not a plot hole.
It's not a plot hole.
You sons of guns, Aaron.
I think it might be. I think if we're gonna use it, the other ones, I think it might be, guys.
Our definition
Until some Chad comes up in volume 3 and tries to date her, and Peter has to dance for her hand, and then she's like, "Forget both of you." Do
you think we haven't found the Guardians Easter egg because it creates a giant plot hole?
I mean, but there are also aren't there Gamorreans in Book of Boba Fett anyway? So there we go. There's more out there. Get it, Gamora, Gamorreans, and they're both green. All right.
All right. That's me. For my last one, this one is Brandon. I know last time you said that yours was something you found on all of when you Googled lists of the biggest MCU plot holes. This is one I found on every single list I read. And that bothered me so bad because it's not a plot hole. And that is that Thanos...
Charlie's going to conclude this by saying it is a plot hole.
It's not a plot hole at all. Thanos willingly gave Loki the Mind Stone. And Thanos' whole goal was to collect the Infinity Stones, and he gave Loki the scepter to go conquer Earth. And so he gave away an Infinity Stone. That's not a plot hole. He willingly gave Loki... Because we know how little he thinks of Loki. And how easily he took a stone from Loki a couple movies later and slaughtered him. He gave Loki, knowing full well it was the Mind Stone, giving him the power to conquer Earth, because I think that he truly believed it was so much easier to manipulate Loki, who was kind of groveling and sucking up to him. He's like, I can deal with him. That's not a problem. I don't want to deal with these Avengers and these things. I'll let him. If he dies, cool. Whatever. One less problem. If he wins, great. He's already under my thumb. I can just take the thing back. I get the Space Stone and the Mind Stone, and I don't have to do any work for it at all. And that's what he's essentially been doing this whole time. He sent other people to get the Power Stone. Like he was sitting back, and that's the whole reason for Ultron is I'll do this myself, because he let other people try for a long time.
We're talking about Loki. We're talking about Loki?
Loki that Thanos did not respect at all.
Bro, Loki is a liar. Thanos, he knows a lie. Can the man sniff out a lie or not?
He knows he's a liar, but he doesn't think anything of him. He thinks Loki is a peasant, worthless pawn. And he treats him as such through the entire franchise.
Until he kills him.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's not a choice Thanos made.
Charlie, you're moving. You're getting excited. The people in the cars listening to this in podcast form are driving into traffic poles just knowing that their speakers are exploding. I don't think this is a plot hole. I think Thanos made some bad decisions, but it's fine. And this goes back to the scepter having never been the Mind Stone in the first place. So it is as smoothed over as that is. If you consider the Mind Stone a plot hole, then this is also a plot hole. Both have been smooth, finessed, massaged out into the story. I think not a plot hole.
I agree. I don't see this as a plot hole. I think it's more just a bad decision. It's an unnecessarily complicated decision in the grand scheme of things, but it's kind of you just have to make the sacrifice in order to potentially get more stones. So I don't know. Not a plot hole.
Yeah, if you hold up Thanos as like an all-knowing, all-powerful, like makes all the best decisions all the time being, then maybe. But
he makes great decisions. He too is cursed with knowledge. Aaron's holding it in. Aaron's holding it in down there. We broke him. We did it.
You just absolutely destroyed me. I think that Charlie's thing holds some water, because I laughed at the this is gonna reflect badly on me. When we got out of Infinity War the first time, after we got over the screaming children, the sad, crying children in the theater we were in, I was like, wow, he really did him like freaking Devo or Worm in Friday. He had him running his light work, and when he was no longer useful, he got rid of him. He got him up out of the paint with the quickness as soon as he wasn't useful. You have to,
he did it to his own daughter.
Yeah, he's all about weird min-max, I need to do this to get to this point. And listen, Thanos is the kind of person that in Super Mario World will look at a jump that he can't make and then sacrifice a Yoshi every time. And we all love Yoshi. He will throw that dinosaur into that pit immediately if it means I can progress. So I kind of feel Charlie on this, but I don't think it's a plot hole. I just it's just funny.
Yeah.
He's just using all these weird people, all these growl soldiers, and he treats them all like Wanda. He's like, I don't know you. You were just about getting these stones. I don't care about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see them meeting. I'd like something in the MCU to show us their, like, just for some reason, for that to serve a purpose. Show their meeting. That'd be cool in something. Anyway, I think we all agree. Not a plot hole. This last one's going to take 3 hours. So here we go. And it belongs to the lucky number, Aaron.
Oh, God. So I, for myself, like, bringing up the end of Endgame is never like a pleasurable experience, right? It's never very fun. No one's ever having much fun discussing the end of Endgame. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. Nope, no one likes it. It is a dangerous zone full of scary sounds, scary people, weird planning, weird stuff. I was like dreading this because I was like, but then I'm like, you know what? I can just play weird stuff on my keyboard instead of addressing the problems here. So what we have is, why didn't Captain America return the Infinity Stones? And why didn't we get to see it? And why is it not in there? And how do you go back and give back the Soul Stone? How do you go back down 12 and go holler at the Ancient One to give her back the Time Stone? How do you go back to, I guess, put your arm through that incinerating cylinder that Peter Quill got the Power Stone out of? All fun things that I'm sure we're going to get when inevitably Chris Evans comes back to give us it in either a movie or a Disney Plus series.
6 episodes Disney Plus series. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way you can make this better for a lot of people, because they're like, holy guacamole, why? But then the funny thing is, I'm like, there's no room in Endgame to show him doing it, though. It's art. Like, we were just joking around about it the other day, like here in the house. I was like, that's a long movie. Imagine if they had tacked on like his whole journey to give it back, even if it was like a montage. That's another 15 minutes of a movie where you've been in the theater for 3 hours, 3+ hours. Like, it's just a lot. So this isn't even, for most people, the biggest plot hole in the last bit of Endgame. So you can't really defend it. I don't think you can really defend it. You can just be like, well, they're going to give it to us later at some point, you know? I mean, they could subvert everybody's expectations and have somehow him strike up a deal with Kang. There's all sorts of weird things where it could get explained. I just don't know. I get having faith in the audience to just divine it on their own, but this level of divining on their own might have bit them in the butt, because I don't even think, if the Disney Plus series comes out now, will it be able to live up
It's
to
only going to make it
people have
worse.
built in their brains.
Yeah.
It's only going to make it worse.
I don't know if anybody's seen Book of Boba Fett today. It's amazing. It's really good. It's the best episode of the thing so far. But everybody's been like, oh, I feel like I've been ripped off the entire time. And I'm like, it's been fine. Everybody's so poisoned by, like, they want the end of whatever it is at the beginning. And I think we could do ourselves all a favor and just wait till they give it to us instead of worrying too hard about the logistics of everything.
Book of Boba Fett could have given us anything along the way to make it interesting, but that's a different
conversation.
Yeah, let's not retread the argument we were having.
I can't deal with y'all today.
That's a different cut. Listen,
you need to enjoy the ride, man.
It only took 5 weeks to get good.
Aaron knows.
Anyway, I'll say this about this Infinity Stone replacement saga. I think right now it's a big plot hole, but I think it may ultimately become a plot device, which is the purpose of the whole story. Like, I think that this is what kicks us into the Secret Wars saga. Like, this didn't work. And the fallout of Endgame is very much informing everything we've seen so far. So whether that's Black Widow's death having an impact on Clint Barton's mental state, or like just everything, like Loki dying and getting a series because he escapes. Like, I think that right now is a huge plot hole, but I think Endgame and the multiverse and everything coming out of it is going to end up being a huge part of the story. So there's a chance that this becomes a huge part of the multiverse story, the same way the Loki finale at the first point we talked about allowed the multiverse to exist for Spider-Man No Way Home. Right now, huge plot hole. I'm hoping that it ends up serving a purpose and getting resolved. Right, because right now it don't make any sense.
I think the best thing they can possibly do is never address it again. It is time travel. It will never make sense as long as, no matter how hard they try, no matter what they do, you're never going to make sense out of everything that happened. I think Marcus and McFeely did the absolute best they could to tie it all up in a bow that mostly makes sense and we can all accept and just deal with, because it's time travel.
Well,
it's
like, I mean, they could go put the
issues.
stones back. They could go put the stones back, but they don't have the orb. They don't have the Tesseract. They don't have the scepter. They don't have the red stone, the reality
I mean,
stone.
there's the whole thing about because
like,
then you get into alternate timelines. Because then if you took the stone away,
changed.
then what was in the Eye of Agamotto? What's in the Eye of Agamotto now? Like,
right.
There's all these different things. You can talk about Mjolnir. You can talk about every individual stone, like you just mentioned. They can create little plot holes. He went and lived with Peggy, but she was building S.H.I.E.L.D. What were they doing together that entire time? Like, were there just two of them? Did she not make S.H.I.E.L.D. because she was with him? Was he just at home, nobody watching? There's so many little plot holes you can take from this one big action that I think individually could be addressed at some point in other narratives, just kind of as a mention here and there. But the idea of him going back in time, the idea of what they did in Endgame, I think it's the best we're going to get. And I say that more as a compliment to Marcus and McFeely than anything. I think they did a really good job of tying up that whole thing. Just, it's done. We do not have the energy to go back and deal with all these things. If we want to care about story and not just explanations, we have to move on. It happened. There's no reason to keep going with it. It is a plot hole, but one that mostly works for all intents and purposes. So I think we just let it go. Is my stance on the whole thing.
Lost did time travel perfectly. It's the only thing that ever did.
I mean, Back to the Future, I think, made a lot of sense.
Back to the Future is a bunch of bullshit, according to Ant-Man.
I'm in agreement with Brandon. I think it is a thing where this is a plot hole until it eventually feeds into Secret Wars. I think the only way that this would actually be satisfying to me as somebody who did not like Cap's ending for Endgame would be to have it tie into Secret Wars and all actually serve a purpose in the larger grand scheme of things. There's this quote that I've had on my Google Doc of notes that I've been wanting to use, which is from All of the Marvels, which is a really good book from Douglas Wolk that kind of talks about the history of Marvel Comics as a whole.
I have that book.
It's so good. I have been savoring because it is just a tome of knowledge. It is so good. And he says at one point, the incompleteness is part of the fun of this endless, imperfect, collaboratively created story. An open question that a particular episode of it poses might be resolved by the creators who asked it, or by other creators later on, or by nobody at all. So I feel like a lot of the big plot holes we've discussed today fall in that category. And I feel like this is kind of the biggest one yet of there's an avenue to tell a story of Cap returning the Infinity Stones. But if we never get that story, we are still getting so many other stories that it will all be worth it in the end.
I do think it's amazing how the comment section is so divided on Cap's ending. You have people who are like, Cap deserved to end with Peggy. It was great. And then you have everybody else who's like, Cap's ending was trash. But yeah, I think Jenna makes a great point. I think this is going to be one of those things that goes on to be handled by other people, unless the Russos come back for Secret Wars. Then they have to solve their own problem. And they've been open about that to that point, that they kind of did this and they were like, well, we're done. This is kind of someone else's problem now. They've made that joke publicly on interviews.
But that's every comic creator ever, to Jenna's point and to all the Marvels point. Aaron, you mentioned Donny Cates' Venom. He left a giant thing at the end of that for someone else to come. I think Al Ewing's on it now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Ram to just come in and do something completely different, but he didn't tie it up. There's a lot there to deal with. And it's the fun of it is just to watch where it goes.
Yeah.
And if it's never addressed again, we got that story, and it doesn't really matter how it happened. We got what we got, and we all had a great time, even if we didn't like particulars about it. We liked the Infinity Saga as a whole, and it was how they needed to wrap up the Infinity Saga. Yeah. So it is what it is.
Yep.
I say plot hole for now, probably a story serving point later.
Same.
Oh, it's a huge plot hole. I just don't care.
I now really want Jenna's like Exile series to tie in to start freaking Secret Wars with him just
That would be
teaming
so
up
much
with
fun.
random variants of his friends
Yeah.
to help kick it all off. Like, especially if you were like you go through, like Kofi said, every episode is one of the stones, and then the last one he goes to put the last one back. It'll probably be the Mind Stone. It'll probably be in 2012, and then Kang steps out like, "Yoink, sorry," and then boom, we start, and then throws everything out of balance. It would be delightful.
If he puts the Soul Stone back, can he get Nat though?
Bro, he'll be. I mean,
they need both of them to come out of a portal for the third act of Secret
Bambi's
Wars.
mom. All right. All right, y'all. Well, that was our plot hole show. We are one big plot hole here on Phase Zero. That was fun. Thank you for everybody on Twitter who helped inspire this episode. I'm hoping. I probably shouldn't even say this because it might not happen. But I'm hoping that next week is trivia. We're gonna have to find a few fans to play in trivia. I know Cam Hayward is in. I believe Layla is in. I got to reach out to Johnny Gargano because that is our celebrity team. Layla is a celebrity, and we will treat her as such. And then we will have, I don't know, maybe we'll do the 3 hosts or 3 fans. I don't know, but it's going to be a lot of production on getting the video component of the trivia show ready as well. But we'll figure it out, and we're hoping to do that next week. I know we can't do it 2 weeks from now, so it's either next week or 3 weeks from now. But anyway, this is the plot hole show. It's never happening again because this went on. We're never doing 15 of them. I'll tell you that right now.
No.
But jeez, I hope Jamie got some good sleep today.
Yeah.
And thanks to Charlie for coming on. Charlie, any last words for today's episode of Fazoro?
No, I've said a lot of words. I'm good. I'm just glad to be here.
We're happy
glad
to
be here and talk and make nonsense.
Thanks for joining. Jenna, any parting words?
Follow me on Twitter at Hey It's Jenna Lynn. Go read some comics. And yeah, I can't believe we survived this episode. This was a lot, but this ended up being great.
2022 has been chaotic on Phase Zero. Aaron, anything you'd like to leave us with?
At Summit Lake Hornet on Twitter. And I saw that we put out the list on Twitter and I muted them promptly. But I just like to say, I looked up and everybody was mad. I want one thing to be clear. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care at all. I sleep easy. I sleep great. It don't matter. I'll see y'all when it all comes out. And we'll hash it out then. How about them Cowboys?
Oh, that's amazing. And that's it. That's the show. Goodbye.
Yep.